Tracye Warfield is not your typical 55-year-old African-American woman. Aside from the fact that she rocks a bald head and currently a shiny new set of braces, she has traveled the world since the age of 16, mostly by herself, to 5 continents, numerous countries, and counting. She lives with no limit. She's climbed the ranks of corporate America in finance and was a unicorn amongst the sea of old white men in boardrooms. She became a marathoner and triathlete after being barely able to walk to her mailbox. She also left a prestigious and lucrative life to train and teach yoga. Tracye became an entrepreneur on a wing and a prayer, as she describes it, and it has expanded into a respected wellness business called bytracye. Listen to this episode of the Age Has No Limit podcast to learn about Tracye Warfield, a woman who has been to rock bottom, who was homeless and broke but not broken, and who climbed her way back to being a motivational speaker, author, podcast and webcast host, consultant, and retreat designer. It's the Age Has No Limit podcast. We're here to show and prove that your age shouldn't prevent you from designing and living the life you want. I'm your host, Patrice Davis. Let's get started. Welcome back to the podcast. So as you all know, I'm here with Tracye Warfield. So Tracye, I'd like to jump right into talking about Inspirada Merida, the retreat. Yeah. You are hosting one this year in Merida, Mexico. Tell the audience what they can expect from a retreat hosted by you.
Yeah, I am hosting one here in Merida, where I'm currently living in the Yucatan, and I just love it here. You know, Patrice, I have been in the retreat wellness business, if you will, and healing and service for, about 10 years for retreats. And I've done retreats all over the world, particularly in Costa Rica and in Barbados, and some mini retreats in other places. But here in Merida, it's just such a special place. And in the past, what we really focused on in those retreats, of course, at my base, was yoga and food, and really yummy food, things that were healthy, nutritious, delicious, that you could be energized and enjoy during your retreat. We focused, of course, on rest and relaxation and yoga. And what you're going to find in Inspirada, which means inspire in Spanish, is some of that as well. But really the focus here is on getting vibrant in your life. It really is about abundance, health, and happiness. And Merida is such an inspired place. It's such a charming city. And there's just so many elements of it that just allow you to, one, find your foundation, right? It's rooted in a very proud, amazing Mayan culture, as well as a Spanish culture. So it allows you to really get that foundation as well at the retreat. We're at a beautiful, beautiful boutique hotel that I'm just in love with, that allows you to find respite and be your sanctuary. It's also about, moving your physical body, but in a way that works for you. As you know, we've talked about before, Patrice, I'm all about authentic, unapologetic unicorn. So that's what you get to be when you come to this retreat. You get to move in a way that serves you under my guidance as a yoga instructor and a movement instructor in that space, as well as get to adventure out and around in the space of Merida to be inspired by the food, the culture, the people, and all that it brings. So it's really a place for you to come, get rested, get relaxed, be moved internally and externally, eat some amazing, delicious food, be re-energized, as well as there's a new element that we've added to the retreats, which is designing your day. We all know that it can be really hard to think really far out in our lives in terms of the changes we want to see, whether it's in our wellness or in general. And so this retreat is really about, let's stay in the day, right? Let's just be in the day and do these things in the day and see what happens. So we're going to be spending some time in mindfulness and meditation around that. What would it look like if I design my days back home like this?
Yes, yes. And I'm thinking about that now. Like, what would it look like? Well, I do design my days, but it's typically around my business. But what if I were to design my days around wellness, around being mindful, around being more aware of my body and its movements? And I think that is actually, I say revolutionary. I don't use that word often, but it would
Wow.
be revolutionary for someone like me who's used to designing my day around my tasks, right? So I do spend some time in the morning doing some of that, but then how about designing it throughout your day and integrating it throughout your day where possible? So thank you for bringing that, at least to, to all of us, actually. Now, one of the reasons you actually host the retreat in Merida is because you live in Merida. It's a
Mhm.
beautiful, beautiful place. I think with the first time we talked, I did say that is on my must visit list.
Bring it on.
Yes. And you also shared with me the story of how you ended up in Merida, which I think is
Yeah.
really amazing and fantastic. Tell us how you ended up in Merida, Mexico.
Yeah, I probably to my family and very close friends, it's not surprising. But to everyone else, it is because it's kind of how I roll. It's kind of who I am. But
Mhm,
I was coming back from, I'd spent 2 years in Asia during the pandemic, which how I got to Asia is another story. But I spent 2 years in a little over because I spent some time in Bali and Thailand. And then I ended up in Vietnam for
mhm,
2 years when the pandemic hit and was there. Uh,
mhm,
and it was an amazing, incredible experience. But, I had to get back to the States. And so as I was traveling back to the States, I was like, I'm loving this expat thing. And for years, I've been a traveler, a world traveler, but most often, like you, Patrice, for work. It
yeah.
wasn't necessarily for me. I was either doing a retreat or consulting or doing something for someone else
Mhm,
or with someone else who wanted to go and I didn't really want to go. And
mhm,
so this was new to me to be in the world. And so on my way back from Vietnam, because I had to come back to get a vaccination and whatnot, I was thinking, I don't know if I want to be back.
mm,
I don't think I want to be back. And I happened to sit next to a gentleman. My seat was moved,
mm,
right? And so I was sitting next to this gentleman and we were talking and he was from Merida. And
mm,
I was saying, well, tell me more about it because I've never met a stranger. And so we're going to have a conversation and never a stranger. And he was just lit up telling
mm,
me about Merida. I have been to Mexico many times and I had no idea where it was.
mhm.
And so I said, that's great. I'm sold. Booked a trip. And just right there. As soon as I got off the plane, I was like, I'm going to Merida. Uh,
Mhm,
and at the time I was like, Merida, Merida. It's
mhm,
Merida.
mhm,
And I had decided I was going to stay for a month. When
mhm,
I travel now, I usually try to stay for at least a month, and I'm very fortunate that I can take my work with me and do that so that I can just be the lazy tourist.
yeah.
And so I booked 30 days and arrived and thought, tell no one about this place. If they don't know, don't tell them.
Yeah.
We don't want them here.
Yeah.
But it was just this charming, uh, big city. Merida is the capital city of the Yucatan, I understand.
Mhm,
And it is bustling in its own very quiet way. It's like muted. I had a
mm,
friend who came and visited, and that's how we defined it. It's like a muted, amazing city with Mayan ruins all throughout,
mhm,
juxtaposed against these brand new structures and has this Spanish colonial vibe to it as well. And so I came for 30 days and ended up now being here for almost 2 years, off
mhm.
and on. And
Yeah.
so it's a beautiful place and I do highly recommend it. And like I said, for the retreat, I thought it's the first time I'm doing a retreat that's not sitting right on the water.
Mhm.
And I thought this is a very special place to do that.
So for those of you who are listening, I'd already shared with Tracye that, there are certain cities in Mexico that I wanted to explore. But after I learned that Merida, Inspirada Merida, the retreat is going to be hosted in Merida, I've already shared with her it is on my list of to do to actually go to the retreat because I get to actually participate in a retreat with a person who has a lot of experience hosting retreats. And I also get to experience that retreat in Merida. So just know that it is on my list and I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's a matter of me just looking at all the other things that I have on my calendar and making sure that it lines up. So I really, really appreciate you providing that insight about Merida. Now, we've talked a little bit about the retreat you're hosting, a little bit about where you've lived. We've
Yeah.
also talked about, how you ended up in Merida itself. We haven't really gotten to know Tracye Warfield, the woman. So tell me about where you're from, if you have any
Yeah.
siblings, and early stages of your career. You also have a very, very interesting story about your career and how you ended up where you are now.
For sure. Well, actually, I'm originally from the Bay Area in California. Hey, Bay Area. I was born in Stockton, California, and raised in San Jose, California, went to high school, all that there, and then left
Mhm.
and went to college
Mhm.
in Arizona. Actually, I first started in San Diego at
Mhm.
UCSD and transferred to Arizona State, where I went to school at Arizona State and then stayed and was there for 10 some odd years, where we can talk about my career. That's where I started my career in, of all things,
Mhm.
banking. I
Yeah.
just find that hilarious to
Yeah.
me because it just was not on my list
Yeah.
at all. I
Mhm.
went to school for journalism and it just wasn't. I happened into that role and also into yoga. That's a little bit different story because I got sick
Mm.
and I was trying to heal myself. And during that time, that's when I accepted just any position. Right. I was like, I need to work. And so I had been a collector my
Mhm.
entire college career to pay my way through.
Mhm.
And I was a very good collector because I was a broke college student. And I understood it. I understood the psychology around that and
Mhm.
around being in that space. And so I was very, very good at it, and people wanted to pay me. And so I went to work for Bank of America first as a collections agent, and then worked my way up the chain and found a niche in that world around training and development. And
Mhm.
that's where my career path led me. And that led me from Arizona back to the Bay Area,
Mhm.
where I worked for the bank for years. And then I moved back east. I
Mhm.
moved back east to DC first, DC, Virginia,
Mhm.
and stayed for about a year before I finally ended up in New York. I've been a New Yorker for about 20 years.
Mhm.
And that's also hilarious because I do not like the cold at all.
Yeah.
And ergo why I am a global citizen for the
Yeah.
past almost 7 years. I
Yeah.
spend most of my time outside of my love,
Mhm.
New York. But in that time, I was, of course, a corporate American. I
Mhm.
had all the things to prove it. You
Mhm.
know, I
Mhm.
did all the things to prove it. I was in the HR world or organizational development world in finance. Like
Mhm.
I said, I left for a year and then I went back,
Mhm.
which I find hilarious for me
Yeah.
because it wasn't for me. And as soon as I went back, I was like, this is not working. And it
Mhm.
was around that time when I left the Bay Area and moved back east that I actually really dove into a yoga practice. Like I
Mhm.
said, I was hobbled. And
Yeah.
so a friend of mine, I had been doing some distance running, running marathons with some new friends.
Mhm.
And she said, hey, come to a yoga class with me. And I was like, okay. And it's hot, and it's hot yoga.
Yeah.
And I
Oh, hot
and
yoga.
I was like, oh, great.
Mhm.
Total Gemini type A
Mhm.
yogini in the making.
Yeah.
And so I went and I thought, it smells like feet, but this is cool. And
Okay.
it's hot and sweaty. And
Yeah. Yeah.
so I thought, but this is cool and there's something to this. And I may not really love this type, but I might like something else. So when I
Mm.
moved back east, my practice started to become more a part of my day. 86th and 1st in New York is where I lived, and there was a yoga studio at the New York Sports Club a block away from me, and that's how I started to really get into that. And I had no idea that that was going to be or wellness was going to be my path. I just knew this.
Mm-hmm.
I had basically cured myself, certainly, of many things.
Mm-hmm.
I had lost some weight, which I needed to personally for me. I was not experiencing some of the chronic conditions that I'd had, and I had changed my diet. And there were a lot of things that were really working for me that I wanted to share with other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't know how. And so I stayed in the industry. I worked for an au pair company in training and development, ran their training and development group until, I like to say the universe just said, enough. Here's what you need to do. You need to stop doing that and at least start teaching yoga and see what happens with that. And that birthed my company, Bytracye. I left my corporate job. I was talking on another podcast, and I was saying how I didn't really do it the strategic way, y'all. Don't follow me necessarily, or maybe, right? But I just left and started doing what I intuitively felt was right and good and felt good. And it wasn't easy, but that's how I started my company. It was based solely in the practice of yoga. And then I had, of course, some other things that I'd been schooled in infant massage, and I'm a self-taught chef. So I was doing a lot of those things to supplement my yoga practice, teaching practice. And that's how Bytracye was birthed. And we can go into that a little bit more, but I do have a big family. We'll segue to that. I have a super huge family. I have 11 brothers and sisters.
Oh, wow.
And my parents, my mother just passed about a year and a half ago, and my dad. The first set were much older. There are 5 of us, and then there came another set, which were 6, and they're much younger, so they could be my children, if you will. And so it's been a very interesting experience in our family, and everybody lives all over the place right now. So it's a real interesting family dynamic. And I forget the other question you asked me.
Well, I no, so whatever it is, it will come back. I think what we wanted to find out was early part of your career, and you did answer that question. So there are a couple of things I want to pick back up on. Number one, I do, of course, want to extend my condolences for the passing of your mother. I know it's been a year and a half, but I'm sure there's some,
Sure.
challenges as far as that's concerned.
Sure.
The second thing you mentioned was that when it was time for you to make the change when you decided to leave the au pair company and, managing training and development for that company, something shifted, which you said felt intuitively right and good. Can you describe that feeling for me?
Yeah. I talk a lot about flow. And what that is, and I'm not the master of flow. There's someone for that. There's a TED Talk on that. You should watch it. But the intuition comes through practice. And many of us think it is this like inner, and sometimes that happens, but more than likely it's because you've practiced something that has put you into a state of flow, where time stands still, where you are just in joy. Even if it's hard, you're in joy, where your breath is smooth and fluid, where you can't wait to get to it, where you don't want to leave it, where the people around you are flowing with you. And that comes through action and practice. And that's what gets that thing in our belly going. We had to have experienced it before. In order to get that, like that little voice that says, wait a minute, you need to be doing that. Or being with that person or going there. And that to me is what intuition is. It is that you have practiced, you've shown up and done some practice that has put you in a state of flow. And guess what? Your body, your mind, your spirit does not forget that. And it will gnaw at you.
Hmm.
forever until you enlighten it.
Yeah. You know, I'm going to pick back up on what you just said as well.
Yeah.
So there are a few things that you said that really, really spoke to me, and they spoke to me for a number of reasons. Number one, I have, I would say maybe in the past year, really, really for the first time tuned into intuitive tugs or intuitive messages. I have noticed that when in the morning, which is typically when I am actually engaged in my morning routine, which does include some meditation or light meditation, because I'm working to build up that practice.
Yeah.
But there is a silence that I practice almost every day. And I do find that those intuitive tugs and those messages and prompts come after that has happened and I've cleared my mind and I'm really, really focused on myself. And those times when sometimes it's telling me, it's giving me a warning. If I ignore the warning, it does actually happen later that day. Those other times when it's actually telling me, do that versus do that. Or I've been giving some kind of realization and I move in the direction of that realization. I was explaining to someone the other day, there is no friction in that movement
Oh,
because I'm following basically my intuition. My intuition is telling me to go right. I'm going right. There is no friction. It
yeah.
feels natural. There is no questioning. And so I really thank you for bringing that up because there is, and I'm going to definitely look into that TED Talk because there
Yeah.
is a flow that comes with whatever that practice is. And so the more I think and process this for myself and I hear these cues, even the cues are
Yeah.
messages. Even the
Yeah.
cues are messages.
Yeah.
The people you come across, that person you met on the plane that described Merida, that all of these things are happening because they were supposed to happen. And
Absolutely.
yes, yes. So thank you.
Absolutely.
I appreciate
You're
that.
you're welcome. I just have to say, first of all, you are speaking my love language right now.
Yes.
I wish more people would, in my podcast and in my books and anytime I get an opportunity, I'm like, listen, whatever
Hmm.
you want to call it,
Hmm.
I call it the universe is always,
Yes.
always chatting at you.
Yes.
Sometimes it's a holler,
Yeah.
right? Sometimes it is a straight up
Yes.
holler, but
Yes.
most of the time, if it's got to be a holler, it's because you just are not listening.
Hmm.
And that means that you probably are going to get sat down in
Yes.
some way. I call it a wall slide. Either
Hmm.
you're going to sabotage yourself in that job that you're in, or you're going to get fired,
Hmm.
or the relationship is going to come to an end,
Yeah.
or you're just not going to be able to function, or you're
Yeah.
starting to experience stress and anxiety and depression, or you're going to get physically ill,
Yes.
right? If you're
Absolutely.
not listening to that. But you're so right on.
Hmm.
I get asked all the time, how do you know when you're in flow? I'm like,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
there is no, as you said, there is no friction.
No, there's no friction.
There is no friction,
Yeah.
right?
And
At all.
no, it's not only is there no friction, um, I do want to go back to what you said about there is a practice.
Hmm.
There is a knowing there is something that you have done to block
Hmm.
out the world in some way. And so you don't have to wait for a holler. As you're now listening to those whispers and those tugs. They
Right.
come. They definitely, and I've experienced that a lot in my life. And I actually made a conscious decision about
Yeah.
3 months ago. I said, Patrice, there have been instances recently when there was a tug that said don't do and you did,
You
and
did.
so as a result, and I've seen what happened because that silence is happening. You don't pay
Right.
attention to these trends and to these notices and to these tugs and to these whispers when there's a
Yeah.
lot going on in your life, when you start your day with all the things and
Yep.
all the distractions. If whatever it is, you've got to figure out what that is for you so that you can start paying attention
Yeah.
to the universe speaking to you. It does
That's right.
happen. It does happen. And I thank you for bringing that up. That is not a part of our conversation, what I had planned for our conversation, but even this is fantastic, a fantastic exchange that is meant to happen. So
I
thank you.
love it. You're welcome. I have to say one more thing on that. Just
Sure, absolutely.
one more for your audience and for us, because I'm
Mm-hmm.
constantly in the practice.
Mm-hmm.
Meditation and also just making that space is not about blocking out. It's
Mm-hmm.
not.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that we always want to be mindful of is that the message is in the madness. The message is in the chaos. And
Mm-hmm.
I think it was actually, I think it was at the time at the solstice in Times Square when I was working with them. Rodney Yee, who's a great yogi,
Mm-hmm.
was there. Colleen and Rodney were there, and we were talking, and he was talking about really almost inviting,
Mm-hmm.
right? Inviting in, but not setting the table for, right?
Yes.
The chaos. I like
Mhm.
to say, don't serve it a glass of wine. Uh,
Yes.
the chaos, no wine, no hors d'oeuvres. You
No, I
cannot
know.
stay. You cannot stay. But
Yes.
inviting it in, and
Mhm.
this goes to anything in your life, right? This isn't, you don't necessarily have to meditate for this. This is about stream of thought, right?
Mhm.
Just allowing it in, seeing it for what it is, because more than likely, there's a message writing on that for you. There's
Mhm.
a message in everything, and you might be missing it trying to block out a negative thought or a noise or, there's leaf blowers here where I live. It's the cost you pay for living in a landscaped area.
Mhm.
And it's always.
Mhm.
And when I first moved here, it was like, oh, I mean, you could hear it even through soundproof doors.
Mhm.
And it was something for me to actually play with. After a few weeks, I was like, okay,
Mhm.
so what is it about this? Let me investigate this without setting the table and pouring it a glass of wine.
Yeah.
Let it be so that
Mhm.
I can get the message that's writing with it. If we spend
Yeah.
all of our energy trying to block that out,
Mhm.
then we are creating even more chaos. So
Yeah.
just had to drop that in there. We don't want to
No.
block anything. Just let it
Yeah.
come on through, because
Yeah.
it's ushering in, right, other things, or it will stay. And
Mhm.
now you don't have space. All right, we weren't talking about that.
No, 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 no. This is great. Because this is where the conversation I think is definitely meant to flow. So,
Yeah.
I'm glad you also said that. I actually, I did tell you about a retreat that I was at last week. And there was one of the people that attended the retreat is a person that I enjoy speaking with. She and I were in the same mastermind together, and I just enjoy speaking to her. And I learned during that retreat that she actually has been meditating, I think, for many many years, and she told me why she needed to start meditating, and she basically described a process that for the very first time I said to myself, I could do that. And what she described, and I'm going to share it with the audience and with you, is she says what she does is she allows the thoughts to come, and rather than trying to block them out, she will say, I hear a bird in the background, and she'll basically acknowledge it and bring herself back to
Bring it
her
back.
feet. She says
Right.
basically she makes sure her feet are flat, and she's always sort of grounding herself through her feet. So she's always staying present. So she may
Yeah.
hear a leaf blow in the background. She said, yeah, she'll acknowledge the leaf blower, and then but she
Mhm.
says, but I'm here and I'm
That's right.
present. So in other words, she allows it to come in, and then she lets it go. And then,
Brings it back.
yeah, it's just amazing. And I was like, I could do that. So
Yeah.
when I say I can do that, it was just me struggling with figuring out how to get to that. No, but she did say eventually, as a result of focusing on being present, you do get to a point where, you become that there's a higher awareness of who she is and just
Right.
all of these different things that she explained. And so, yeah, but that was her experience. Thought it was really great to bring into the conversation. Now, one of the things you mentioned, of course, is that you did start, practicing yoga. You mentioned Mr.
Yeah.
Rodney Yee, which I know from Gaia, some of those Gaia
Yeah.
shows. And you also told this fantastic story about this huge yoga
Right.
session that you hosted in Times Square. Tell us about that.
Yeah, it still exists. It's still a
Mhm.
big thing. And I still do work with them from time to time, but it's the Times Square solstice.
Mhm.
It is the big yoga event. About 10,000, thousands of yogis come together at the summer solstice to practice yoga in the middle of Times Square.
Mhm.
And when I first arrived in New York, I was aware of the event, but it took me a couple of years to actually go to the event.
Mhm.
And I remember the first time that I actually went to the event, I was like, okay, we're really going to do this. And I was excited. It's exciting because it's like, we're really going to do this in the middle of amazing yet frenetic uh,
Mhm.
Times Square. And so I got my little mat, and I went out there and and had a space like literally it was in a ditch. It's
Mhm.
that crowded. I had like a ditch space in the corner.
Yeah.
And I thought, this is fantastic. This is so fun. And I promise you, on that day, I said, I'm going to do this one day. I'm going to stand on that stage and I'm going to share a yoga practice. And I wasn't a certified teacher yet. I was just a few years into my yoga practice, and I was doing some teaching, but I wasn't legit yet.
Mhm.
But I was going to school for it.
Mhm.
And so I loved that, but I would go to the solstice, each year for the next couple of years.
Mhm.
And finally, I was teaching and becoming a more popular instructor in the New York area. I built my classes from, nada
Mhm.
to quite a large number, and it was just super fun. I knew I was in my flow. I knew I was doing the thing,
Mhm.
and I was a typical yoga teacher. Y'all, by the way, it's very different now because there's the digital world, there is the internet, there's a lot of things there. It was then too, but yogis weren't really on that. It wasn't like YouTube friendly. It wasn't a thing that people were doing
Mhm.
and on the internet or on the web. And so most of the time, yoga instructors, and still are, were bouncing around to a million different studios during the day. I would be at like 10 different studios in a week,
Mhm.
doing classes and meeting people and expanding the practice. So there really wasn't what there is today, which is so magnificent for all wellness
Mhm.
professionals. And so anyway, I remember being at home one day, and my then partner at the time, we were talking about what I wanted to do and whatnot. And I got a text
Mhm.
from a fellow yoga instructor, and she was like, the solstice is hiring a co-host for their webcast for the solstice. Do it. That was the text. Do it. It's
Yeah.
totally you. Like, you're a yogi, you're an instructor, you're on camera, you do it. And I said, okay. And so I asked him, I was like, should I do it? He's like, yeah. Why are you asking? You never asked me anything. Why are you asking me this? And so I had him, I didn't even have a headshot. It
Mhm.
wasn't a thing that we were necessarily doing at that time. And so I had him take a headshot
Mhm.
and I submitted. And by the end of the day, I got a
Oh,
request to
wow.
come in and do a interview and audition. And
Yeah.
I got it. I
Yeah.
got it. And yeah. And what they were looking for were three hosts to
Mhm.
co-host this event, which is huge. This was the first time they were going to cast it,
Mm.
stream it.
Mhm.
And it was going to be streamed worldwide, and they were really making an event out of it. The Solstice in Times Square has been around for, I think, 15 years. I believe they just celebrated its 15.
Mhm.
And so I did that, and it
Mhm.
was a smash. It was amazing. It was incredible. But what I
Mhm.
really wanted to do was to teach at the
Yeah.
solstice.
Yeah.
Even though I was great at that, I actually got another gig while I
Mhm.
was there. They were like, we want you to be the voice of God, which is the announcer. And
Mhm.
so I became both the webcast
Mhm.
host on camera and
Mhm.
the announcer for the 10,000 that
Mhm.
were there. And
Mhm.
so I did that year, and fast forward, and I did that the next year.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
fast forward, I told them, as we all should, exactly what I wanted to do. I was
Mm.
like, next year I need to come back and be a teacher
Yeah.
on the main stage.
Mhm.
And that happened. And
Wow.
so, yes. And so they called me and said, we want you to be the kickoff.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I launched that yoga practice. You can still find it on YouTube,
Mhm.
Times Square and Solstice. I feel
Mhm.
like it was like 2016. I don't remember when it was,
Mhm.
but it was an amazing experience. It's, at the time it was like pre-pandemic. It was like 10,000 people in
Wow.
different spots throughout Times Square, and it was just a
Wow.
phenomenal experience
Mhm.
and I shared the story with them that morning that I was in that ditch
Yeah.
in the corner,
Yeah.
and you need to claim your life.
Absolutely.
And you need to say it's okay to make changes in your life. If I had not made the changes and followed that gut,
Yeah.
I would not be doing what I was doing that day.
That's perfect. And it's a perfect segue to a statement I was just thinking as you were describing this, was that you do have to pay attention to the change. Well, number one, you need to be able to comfortably make changes in your life, and you do have to claim your life and not box yourself in and not feel that you must do that or you must do that or you must do it by a certain time. So this is a person that is healing from that kind of mindset and that kind of behavior. So you're absolutely right. And I kept thinking as you were telling the story, and then you reminded me it was indeed about 10,000 people. So you went from being in the ditch
That's
to
right.
hosting it as you said you were. You said that in the ditch that I'm
I
going to host it, to actually hosting it. And then I'm so glad that I didn't know this about the story, that you told them I
Mhm.
was in that ditch. And so you were a great example that day, for at least 10,000 people of, like you said, claiming your life. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Before we move on, I'd like
I have
to,
one more thing I wanted to
sure,
say on that
sure,
is
go
that,
right ahead.
and what I heard you say, and I will say this for me, it's
Mm-hmm,
not about making that comfortable. I don't use the word comfort. It's not my word. I
mm-hmm,
use ease for
mm-hmm,
sure.
mm-hmm.
But I do believe that if you're going to claim something, you also have to claim discomfort.
Absolutely.
You have to claim, because there was nothing easy about that time of my, well, I shouldn't say that. I was in love. There was a lot going on,
Mm-hmm.
but the switch, the change,
Mm-hmm.
from everyday dress, business suits,
Mm-hmm.
hair. I
Yeah.
had a lot of it then.
Yeah.
The mentality, the just the life philosophy, the lifestyle, the
Mm-hmm.
money, all those things were not a comfortable change.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was not, and it was ridiculed, and
Mm-hmm.
it was very difficult
Mm-hmm.
for me to transition in that time. And so
Mm-hmm.
I want to just share with your audience that I do believe that when you claim your life, as you are moving through your life, and it is the thing that took me. I did a lot of it as I was younger, but as I got older, knowing that whatever this declaration
Mm-hmm.
is more than likely going to come with some great discomfort. And
Exactly.
so you need to build the muscle
Mm-hmm.
around that through things that we're talking about, Patrice, which is your mindset practice, your meditation practice, your physical fitness practice, your eating, all those things. You need to be building the muscle because it ain't easy,
No.
but it's definitely worth it.
Absolutely. And building the muscle is certainly the right word, the right way to describe it as well, because you do have to build the muscle. Change doesn't happen immediately. And like you said, you have to be willing to accept the discomfort to
That's right.
adjust to that change. So, all really, really wonderful points. Now, before I move on, I do want to, if you can remind me I don't know if style of yoga is the right word, or what
Yeah.
type of yoga you practice.
Yeah, so my business by Tracy has evolved. Yoga is not yoga is always at its core because it's who I am, and
Mm-hmm.
so there's always that. But I no longer teach in
Mm-hmm.
studios, such. I just do so for events and maybe private consults or private events and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
But I am schooled in the practice of vinyasa yoga and that legacy
Mm-hmm.
and hatha, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And I do, when I was teaching at my prime in New York, I taught a lot of vinyasa flow
Mm-hmm.
and power vinyasa.
Mhm,
And so what I love so much about vinyasa, for those of you who know what that
mhm,
is it is choreographed, but it's always changing. It
mhm,
is based on flow. It is based on intuition. It
mhm,
is based on trust,
mhm,
trusting your teacher, trusting yourself to
mhm,
take your body to the place where it needs to be,
mhm,
and maybe tip a toe outside of that, off that edge,
mhm,
maybe go over the edge, but really it is syncing the breath with
mhm.
the movement in a dance, if you
Yeah.
will, so
Mhm,
that you are not in a space of you're not in a space of constriction, and
mhm.
you're making more space to open up to the next thing. And so I love vinyasa. I
Yeah.
do. I love various forms of yoga,
Mm-hmm.
for sure. And I practice many, many, many forms of yoga.
Mm-hmm.
But vinyasa for me, especially as I have gotten older and
Mm-hmm.
my practice has evolved, which y'all, it should. If
Mm-hmm.
you've been a yogi for years, your practice is supposed to evolve, and it's supposed to fit the body you're in today, the
Mm-hmm.
spirit you're in today, right? And whatever else comes with that,
Yeah.
the cracks and the creaks
Mm-hmm.
that are natural to us as we evolve. And so I just love the practice of vinyasa. I think it is freeing, but you have to be able to, and this is part of the practice too, to let go of the order.
Mm. Yeah.
If you, yeah, if
That's
you
a
have
good.
a great teacher,
Mm-hmm.
then you're fine. That person is schooled in practice and understand where they're taking you. They
Mm-hmm.
they should,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so you have to trust and let go of that, and flow with that.
Good. That's an interesting point. Letting go of the order, and so I don't think we talked about, or maybe I didn't share this with you, that I actually started. I would say actually when my son was born, way back, almost 30 years ago, I started very, very briefly, but it was my first time kind of tipping my toe into yoga. I don't remember what form of yoga it was, but I
Yeah,
do remember sharing with my audience, and I'm sharing it with you now that during the pandemic, I knew that I needed to be intentional about that silent space.
yeah,
So I started a morning routine of sitting on my couch, thinking, processing, just kind of really kind of getting my head, really, using my mind to calm anxiety about everything that was going on around me. But before I did that, I would actually do a vinyasa flow that I did consistently, at least 4 to 5 times every week, as a part of that process. I mean, the world was silent. I didn't have a very thick schedule. And so I wasn't thinking about the task I had to do and, the store I had to run to and whatever, and running to the post office, all the things. Um,
right.
and so I definitely attribute that to helping me get to the point where I am now, where I'm actually able to listen to those intuitive tugs.
Yeah,
Unfortunately, I don't do it as often. I always say that when I'm really living as who I am meant to be, and I haven't gotten to her, and I know what she's supposed to be, when I really accept that she is that woman,
yeah,
that's when I'm going to go back to yoga every morning, because then I will prioritize myself. So this is just an admission to all of you out there. I'm still
yeah,
working on myself.
yeah,
When I prioritize myself and my physical, and the physical part of that, which would be a daily vinyasa flow, that's when I know I'm really living as who I'm meant to be. So just FYI, I know I'm not there, but
yeah,
yes. So I definitely understand what you mean by that. And I kept thinking, changing sequence. I can't even imagine that, because again, I'm doing it on my own. I'm not
right.
with the guidance of an instructor. But there have been times when I was like, I don't remember quite the sequence, but I'm going to do
I'll
this and I'm
do
going to do
this.
that.
Right.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I appreciate
It is such for someone who came out of corporate America and a family where I tended to be the most type A in my family, like order. I
it.
need order, right, in my life.
That's me.
And I need to be in control of it, of the order.
Yes.
And I need to win at the order. Um, Vinyasa was mind blowing. And
Mhm.
definitely now that I'm, in my 50s, it's just
Mhm.
a mind blowing thing to be like, I'm going to roll out the mat
Mhm.
and do what comes next in my brain. Now, I am a 20-year practice
Mhm.
teacher of
Mhm.
yoga,
Mhm.
and I am studied, so
Mhm.
I know what poses are and what they do. But I
Mhm.
always offer to people, if you still want to try that, roll out your mat or not, if you don't have one.
Mhm.
It's rare unless I'm like on camera somewhere or my knees are bothering that I'm on a mat.
Mhm.
And just do, just like you said, what you remember and
Mhm.
what feels good, except for things that are like dangerous. Like don't be
Yeah.
sitting on your head and things
Yeah.
like that if you don't know how to do that. Or
Mhm.
if you've only tried it once, you don't want
Yeah.
to do that with a
Do
teacher.
that.
But otherwise,
Mhm.
it is very much a Western, and now the rest of the world, because we have,
Exported.
we're there,
Mhm.
um, to be hyper intense
Mm-hmm.
about things that do not require hyper intensity.
Mm-hmm.
Yoga is not a fitness regime. It is not to be one.
Mm-hmm.
And it has made an impact on my life. When
Mm-hmm.
you ask about, life's transitions and how I changed, yoga has been a very big part of it. The philosophy, the movement, the mindset, the meditation, the teaching of it. It is meant, right, to bring together a unity of mind, body, and spirit of people as well. It
Mm-hmm.
is meant to flow. It is
Yeah.
not meant to be conquered. It
Yeah.
is not meant to be one.
Mm-hmm.
And once you kind of get in that space of it,
Mm-hmm.
you'll find that poses and what your body needs will talk to you. There's been many a practice where I've been like, I'm in a child's pose,
Yeah.
the whole thing. Pema Chaldron is a great monk who talks about the peaceful warrior, the way
Mm-hmm.
of the peaceful warrior.
Mm-hmm.
And I love it when people would years ago come to my class, and a lot of times women who were very, very high powered and busy and exhausted and moms and all those things. And they would come and they would just child's pose and cry on the mat.
Mm.
I was like, bravo,
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
way of the peaceful warrior. So
Yeah.
choreography in vinyasa is not necessary, but you should always do anything,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you are not sure how to do that with an accredited instructor.
Great. Wonderful. Great, great, great tip. Now, as we close out our time together,
Yeah.
I do want everyone to know, for those of you who don't know, that she is indeed the host of Breathe, Go, Flow with Tracye Warfield. So that is your podcast.
Yes.
Tell the audience what they can expect from the podcast.
Yeah, a lot, y'all. I started that podcast when I was going through probably one of the darkest, if not the darkest times in my life.
Mm.
And it was after separation. I was virtually homeless. I found myself in a space that I never could have ever believed I would be in. And a good friend of mine, a new friend, but became a very good friend, said to me, you need to, first of all, do not shut completely down
Mhm.
because you are a creator of inspiration and the world still needs your light.
Mhm.
And you need to be creating something. So what about a podcast? And I was like, I don't know how to do a podcast. And she was like, you don't know how to do half the stuff you've
Mhm.
done in your life in all these years. And I was like, you're right. And you're right. And I'm going to do it. And so I started this podcast. And for those of you out there, I'm 55 and
Mhm.
happily 55.
Mhm.
And I started the podcast now, gosh, 5 years ago, a little under that,
Mhm.
and off and on. And I didn't know what I was doing, but there's this thing called the Google.
Mhm.
And I went there
Mhm.
and said, how do you do a podcast? And I grabbed the first one that came up that was free because
Mhm.
at the time it was tough. And
Yeah.
guess what I did next?
Mhm.
I downloaded the app and I started and I
Mm.
recorded a podcast
Mhm.
and I played it for my friend, which is not something I would normally do. As a Gemini girl, I'm like, it's good enough and I'm
Mhm.
good enough and let's go. But
Mhm.
during that time, as we all do when we go through those dark periods, we can start to question
Mhm.
our ability. And that's why we need to sit with that discomfort.
Mhm.
And that's going to allow us to hear the answers that
Mhm.
remind us of our greatness and boldness and allow us to move on. And so I started the podcast, and she said, this is exactly it. Breathe, Go, Flow is a podcast. It's a storytelling podcast.
Mhm.
It is an inspirational podcast. It's a self-help podcast.
Mhm.
It's basically stories often of my life, which turned into stories of my travels. That was
Mhm.
the start of me really becoming a global citizen and an expat. And
Mhm.
really, what we talked about earlier in this episode about listening to the cues of the universe
Mhm.
whenever they showed up.
Mhm.
Some funny, some hard,
Mhm.
some amazingly incredible,
Mhm.
some loving, some humiliating
Mhm.
to really look at that
Mhm.
throughout the episode. So that's what you're going to get. You're going to get me truth telling,
Yeah.
sharing with you some of my favorite tips and tricks so that
Mm-hmm.
perhaps you can avoid some of the wall slides that I have had. And or I think actually more importantly, that you know them when they come.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's an awareness and that you know that you have not died, at least
Mm-hmm.
not the you that is spectacular, right?
Absolutely.
You are just birthing
Yeah.
and that you will make it and
Mm-hmm.
it will be hard, but you will laugh about it hysterically sometimes. And you will love again, and you will have success again, and you
Mm-hmm.
will move forward. So, right now, there are 185 or so episodes of the podcast, and it's just been a joy to see it have it had taken off
Yeah.
um, like it has since I really wasn't focused on that. I
Mm-hmm.
was like, let me help someone else, let me help them laugh, let me help them smile, let me help them cry, let me help them walk through this life
Mm-hmm.
because we are all truly walking ourselves, walking each other home.
Yeah.
And so that's what the podcast is. You can find it everywhere.
Yeah, and so for those of you who are listening, I will definitely include a link to the podcast directly below the description of this particular episode. And I have to remember too that you did actually study journalism,
I
so this is
did.
probably an opportunity for you to kind of reconnect what you wanted to do professionally. So my final question for you, Tracye, is um, well, actually, I have two final questions.
All right.
Number one, how would you say being an entrepreneur has enriched your life?
Ooh. Let me tell you,
Hmm.
I think, you want to think you're courageous, be an entrepreneur, be a female entrepreneur,
Yes,
be a
yes.
Black
Black
female
female
entrepreneur. We could
entrepreneur.
just keep going.
Yeah.
And be an entrepreneur who has failed a lot and had to start over and over again as you've gotten older,
Yeah.
right? Be an entrepreneur over 50.
Yeah.
And, I think the courage
Hmm.
is the thing that has frankly surprised me. I used
Hmm.
to always say when people are like, you're so courageous, I never really saw that in
Hmm.
a lot of the things that I've done in my life. And I've done some wild things and I've
Yeah.
lived an amazing life. And I hope that on my last day, when I take my last breath, that there are no ghosts around me going, you didn't do me, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm looking forward to that, to be like, gotcha, gotcha, gotcha.
Did that.
Did that, boom
Yeah.
shakalaka. I
Yeah.
hope so. I'm not quite
Yeah.
done yet, but there is that. But yeah,
Mhm.
I think it's taught me, it's brought me an awareness of how freaking courageous I am,
Mhm.
because normal people don't do the things that we do,
Yeah.
that and I say that with much love,
Hmm.
that when you stay in your box,
Hmm.
in a box of, I call it the zone of comfort. I also have a book called Breathe Big, Live Big, a starter guide for your awesome life.
Hmm.
And in that book, I talk about the zone of comfort.
Hmm.
And it's very easy to stay in the zone of comfort. It's hyper courageous to chip away or knock down the wall and step out of it into that space of discomfort and in some cases pain,
Yeah.
um, and make yourself vulnerable. So I think one, it's taught me courage or reminded me that I am courageous.
Hmm.
And I think two, it has also humbled me at the
Hmm.
same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
I was very successful in corporate life.
Hmm.
I was miserable,
Hmm.
but I was very successful.
Hmm.
And it's very interesting when you step out of that, people who knew you in that frame of mind are like, why would you do that? And
Yeah.
who are you? And what's going on with your hair? And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it's a very interesting thing. It's very humbling because it's new territory and nothing, truly nothing is certain.
Hmm.
Or I should say, there are a lot more things that are out of your control,
Hmm.
at least at first, and probably always. And
Hmm.
so I think it's very humbling for me, especially kind of back to the space of being a solopreneur.
Hmm.
And hopefully very soon getting out of that
Yeah. Yes.
and having more people who are going to work with me in this new iteration where bytracye is going, which is expansion. That's my word of the year. So I would say that I'm crazy courageous, and also I have been well introduced to
Hmm.
humility.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Well introduced.
Yeah, absolutely. You think as I think as an entrepreneur, that's definitely, at least you have to have at least one experience with humility. And the great thing, as you said, is the courage to keep going forward regardless. So yeah, so that's great. Now, and my final question is if you can tell me what you think an age has no limit life look like.
Mm.
What does it mean to you?
I think it's forever reinventing. I have this episode in the podcast that's simply called Reinvent. And
Hmm.
every once in a while, I just re-up it and I go, it's the reinvent boost. It's
Hmm.
the booster shot of reinvention. It means to be in a space that is open.
Hmm.
It's very easy for us to pay attention to our human body, to the skin that we're in, and what the world tells us about the skin that we're in.
Hmm. Hmm.
And that is why it is so important for you to, one,
Hmm.
have that stillness practice, have that time where you can come back to you and the real you, the authentic, unapologetic unicorn in you can bubble up. Even if it's like, for 1 minute in the day to remind you that you are not this skin. You
Hmm.
are not. This skin's going to die. I
Yeah.
believe spirit will never, and your
Yeah.
legacy will never. And so
Hmm.
I believe that it's in that constant space of knowing that, so that and openness, so that you can reinvent. I think age is magical.
Hmm.
I really do. And I'm very, 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 I'm not the first person who said this, women wise,
Hmm.
but I love it when I hear women say, because now I get it.
Hmm.
I just like every day I'm curious because I'm like, what else is gonna change?
Yeah.
What else? What else?
Yeah.
You're in that space where you're just constantly, first you're in a stage of, I think I'm surprised.
Hmm.
It's like the first time I had to wear glasses. I remember waking up in the
Yeah.
anybody who wears glasses who've been through the same thing. I
Yeah.
remember waking up and trying to see the alarm clock.
Yeah.
And I kept blinking, like, why am I still asleep? I kept
Yeah.
blinking and blinking and blinking and blinking, and I couldn't see the alarm clock. And just slowly in that same week, I was like, we were out and I was reading a menu and I was like, I can't see this menu. What
Yeah.
is going on? And you're like in that state of like denial and also surprise.
Hmm.
And you get that. And I believe that is what age is like. But the great news is that if you have a mentality of reinvention, if you have a mentality of curiosity, if you have that
Hmm.
practice of knowing that you're here and you're valuable
Hmm.
and that you have something to offer. If you're waking up breathing, you're
Hmm.
supposed to be doing something. You're
Yeah.
supposed to be creating and serving. And I think for me,
Hmm.
when I think about age has no limits, that truly gets to it. It's like if I'm worried about being 55, San
Yeah.
Francisco, then I am not creating, I am not serving, I
Hmm.
am not in the space that I was woke up to be.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a
So
great point.
that's what I think.
No, I think that's an interesting point of view because I could easily take that and say, if I'm worried about this gray that keeps coming back, I'm
Yeah.
not really focused on what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm not really focused on my purpose. I'm not present enough to think about the love that I have for my children and my family and my partner. I'm not thinking about those things because I'm focused on this pesky gray that keeps
That's
showing up.
right.
You know, that I
That's
keep
right.
yeah, I keep thinking I'm going to accept it this time. This is the last time I'm going to cover it. And but then I've also become comfortable with the fact that, when I'm at that point, I'm going to get at that point, I'm going to make that full transition and
Yeah.
I'm in that process. So that is also very insightful and inspirational. And that is indeed why, of course, you are the host of, I want to make sure I have the name correctly, Inspirada Merida, the retreat.
Inspirada Merida, the retreat. Come see us. I also, too,
Mm-hmm.
whenever you're listening, you probably will be able to catch some replays of these, even if it's after.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also the host of the new By Well, Being Well series presents.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I've discovered in the last 2 years and really looking at my business and reinventing and deciding to expand is
Mm-hmm.
that I know a lot of people in the wellness industry,
Mm-hmm.
new people, inspired individuals, as well as some old friends.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to be able to curate and bring them to you.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that we focus on in By Tracye is really making wellness easy and
Mm-hmm.
making it also unique and unicorn to you and
Yeah.
giving you options.
Mm-hmm.
Wellness is not a cookie cutter thing, y'all. Don't let people tell you that,
Yeah. Yes.
right? It is about you making choices for you,
Mm-hmm.
right? When
Mm-hmm.
you're in that state of knowing, then you know it's my choice and
Yeah.
I get to decide. So I've been curating. I've just started to curate some workshops with some of my new besties and some of my old besties.
Mm-hmm.
And the workshops come in, or the series comes in threes. And the first series we've already started, which was on juicing, which was
Mm-hmm.
amazing. And this next one is coming up on, actually, it's tomorrow, March 16th, depending on when you're watching this. And it or listening to this, and it is with an amazing farmer
Mm-hmm.
who is going to teach us how to grow things. So the first series is on food,
Mm-hmm.
and the next series coming up will be on something different. But I'm really excited about that. You can find out more information at tracyewarfield.com.
Mm-hmm.
As well, follow me on all social media at By Tracye, and you'll be able to spell my name right, though, y'all.
Yeah.
Bytracye, and
Mm-hmm.
you'll find it there. But yeah, the retreat is amazing, and Inspired is exactly where you want to be if you want to walk through this life where age has no limit.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find ways to continue. And
Mm-hmm.
when I say have to find,
Yeah.
it's an action, just like we spoke about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
Your flow comes through action.
Yeah.
Never forget that. So the more that you are seeking,
Mm-hmm.
right, inspiration from within as well as without,
Mm-hmm.
right, you'll continue to be inspired and you'll show up amazing.
Absolutely. Well, that is a wonderful, wonderful place where, to um I don't want to say end our discussion. But it's a wonderful place for us to leave it. I do have one thing to add, though, and that is to briefly say that this has been actually a very inspiring conversation. And I don't know if you've already been told this by someone, but as I'm listening to you, I'm noticing a trend where you're constantly giving us permission to, change the sequence of our flow, of our yoga practice, to understand that health and wellness is not a cookie cutter experience, to understand that we need to accept those. I think you said slide against the wall, the backsliding. What do you call it? Wall sliding?
A wall slide, I have to tell you, a wall slide that comes from me growing up watching soap operas.
Mm-hmm.
And when people in the soap operas are over dramatic and there's
Yeah.
something happen, they back against the wall and they slide down the wall in tears,
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
right? And
Uh-huh.
that to me is what happens when we hit rock bottom, when we hit
Yeah.
the wall and the
Yeah.
universe says enough, right?
Exactly. Exactly. So permission. And I don't know if that's the word that you
Yeah.
want me, but that is the word that I'm feeling. And so I'm going to go with that. And so I absolutely, absolutely enjoyed my conversation. I was super, super focused on every word coming out of your mouth. And so I'm sure the audience is also enjoying this conversation as well. So Tracye Warfield, thanks again for your time. I will
Pleasure.
definitely drop information about all the places where people can find out more about you, including the podcast and certainly Inspirada Merida, the retreat. And, again, this has been a wonderful experience. For those of you who are listening, thanks again for joining me for another episode of the AHS No Limit podcast. I'm sure you enjoyed everything that Miss Tracye Warfield had to say. And I'm glad she was yet another example of the fact that indeed age has no limit. Hi. Hi, this is Patrice Davis, host of the Age Has No Limit podcast. Thank you for sticking with us. We have reached the end of our first quarter and we're going to take a break, and we will be back on April 18th, specifically Thursday, April 18th, with another guest here to tell us about their no limit life. While we're gone, remember, age has no limit.